On an otherwise ordinary July evening in 2020, Tennessee Highway Patrol troopers spotted a Chevy Tahoe matching the description of a vehicle belonging to a fugitive who was wanted for attempted murder in North Lauderdale, Florida. The SUV was being driven by 32-year-old Christian Eliud Ramos Murillo, who was suspected of shooting a man in Broward County 12 hours earlier. Police attempted to pull the vehicle over in downtown Knoxville, but Ramos Murillo was determined to avoid capture. He refused to stop and led police on a high-speed chase, which lasted for nearly 20 minutes before officers disabled the vehicle using a pit maneuver. The decision to use the dangerous tactic was made following 2 failed attempts to shoot the SUV's tires. Police cars quickly surrounded Ramos Murillo's SUV, but instead of surrendering, he opened fire on law enforcement from inside his vehicle. 5 officers shot back and he was killed in the shootout while his passenger barely survived. The entire pursuit and the ensuing shootout were captured on dashcam footage, which showed officers swarming the scene after exchanging more than 70 gunshots with Ramos Murillo. He had been forced partially into the back seat of the SUV by the sheer force of the gunfire. Ramos Murillo had a history of violence, which included a prior conviction for chopping a woman's fingers off. After the deadly shootout, his ex-girlfriend told investigators that he had FaceTimed her during the pursuit, making it clear that he was determined to avoid jail at any cost. The officers involved were cleared of any wrongdoing, and Knox County Sheriff Tom Spangler commended them for their handling of the situation during an interview with WBIR, stating that they had done what they were supposed to do and that they had acted in a professional manner. Number 14. Tia Loti Harvey. A 26-year-old Australian woman named Tia Loti Harvey was left with gruesome leg injuries in late 2023 after a road rage incident outside a 7-Eleven store in the town of Coolum Beach erupted into violence. Dashcam footage showed the woman exiting her Subaru hatchback and throwing an air freshener at the driver of a silver ute behind her. The 42-year-old man behind the wheel of the ute tried to drive around the woman but ended up running her over instead. Harvey later claimed that the ute driver became aggressive toward her and motioned for her to exit her vehicle after she slowed down to let another car merge into her lane. She told the Courier Mail that the man grabbed her by the shoulders and flinged her, prompting her to throw the air freshener in retaliation. When he ran over Harvey, he broke both her calves. The young woman claimed that the irate driver then exited his car a second time and continued to harass her before fleeing the scene. Harvey had to learn how to walk again and was robbed of her independence due to her injuries, which forced her to move back into her mother's house. She was also emotionally traumatized by the footage of the altercation, which had gone viral shortly after the incident. According to the most recent available updates on the case, no criminal charges have been pressed against the other driver. Number 13. The murder of Isaiah Robles. The PM rush hour was in full swing in Lehigh Acres, Florida, one evening in February 2020, where a motorist's dashcam captured footage of a civilian car chase that ended in murder in broad daylight. In the video, a man later identified as 24-year-old Ricky Gaspar Ruiz could be seen exiting the pursuing vehicle and firing 16 gunshots at the driver of the vehicle he had been chasing. Ruiz fled the scene with his accomplice, 23-year-old Victor Colon Jr., before police arrived at the scene, where they found 21-year-old Isaiah Robles dead in his Honda Accord with multiple bullet wounds. U.S. Marshals captured the suspects 2 hours from the crime scene in Hialeah the following day, and they were booked into custody on suspicion of murder. Both Ruiz and Colon had lengthy criminal records, with over 30 previous arrests between them for robberies, burglaries, and weapon-related crimes. The defendants and the victim were long-time acquaintances, but the circumstances leading up to Robles' murder remain unclear. Authorities described the incident as a road rage incident, but have not revealed the specifics behind the deadly confrontation. 2 years after the shooting, a jury found Ruiz and Colon guilty of second-degree murder after deliberating for less than an hour. landing both defendants behind bars for life without the possibility of parole. Number 12. Sha Bloomer. While on routine patrol in Louisville, Kentucky, on a hot summer night in August 2012, Officer Fred Wilson pulled over a car with an expired license plate. Nothing appeared to be outwardly out of the ordinary. Something instinctively felt off about the situation. Wilson was accompanied by off-duty officer Daniel Goldberg, who suddenly heard what sounded like someone banging on the inside of the car and yelling for help while Wilson conducted a check on the driver's insurance. The officers noticed that the car's 3 occupants were sitting silently and were not the source of the noise, making it clear that Wilson's gut feeling had been guiding him in the right direction. In the vehicle's trunk, they found its owner, 22-year-old convenience store clerk Sha Bloomer, bound and gagged. Dashcam footage showed the officers approaching the car from behind with their guns drawn and cautiously opening the trunk, to find Bloomer inside with his hands up to show that he posed no threat. The video also showed the officers freeing the young man who had been attacked and kidnapped while finishing up his shift at a Circle K gas station earlier that evening. After entering Bloomer's workplace, the trio had tied his wrists together with a t-shirt, placed a towel over his head and forced him into the trunk of his car. They then went on a 4-hour joyride while Bloomer drifted in and out of consciousness in the stifling heat. The perps reportedly made multiple stops, including to buy drugs, prior to being pulled over. Bloomer later told local station WHAS-TV that when he noticed flashing police lights through a crack in the trunk and overheard the officers talking outside the vehicle, he began making as much noise as possible in order to get their attention. He said that he feared he was going to die that night, but he survived with only minor injuries, thanks to the officers' decision to follow up on Wilson's hunch that something was wrong. The accused captors, Trent Bly, Joseph Davis, and Brittany Elder, were charged with kidnapping, wanton endangerment, and theft. Bly refused to speak to investigators while Davis and Elder denied being involved in the abduction, despite the fact that they were traveling in the car that Bloomer was rescued from. Trent Bly was convicted as charged and is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence. He'll become eligible for parole in 2025 but could remain behind bars until July of 2027. The other 2 defendants took plea deals, but the details of their sentences are unclear. Number 11. Daniel Clary. A Pennsylvania state trooper was gravely wounded during what began as a typical traffic stop in November of 2017 when the man he pulled over opened fire on him and his colleague. Trooper Ryan Seipel and Corporal Seth Kelly pulled 22-year-old Daniel Clary over for speeding in Northampton County and noticed possible signs that he was under the influence of marijuana. Clary failed field sobriety tests, resulting in the trooper's decision to arrest him, but he was determined not to go to jail that day. He violently resisted after being ordered to put his hands behind his back, leading to what authorities later described as a knock-down, drag-out fight that lasted for 2 minutes. The struggle was captured by the troopers' dash cams, which showed Clary wrestling with Seipel and Kelly as they tased him and attempted to get him under control. Clary cried out in pain after being tased, but continued to fight with the troopers, who could be seen struggling to subdue him. He eventually broke free from their grasp, retrieved a semi-automatic pistol from his car, and opened fire, shooting Kelly in the leg, shoulder, and neck. The troopers shot back, striking Clary in the side, hand, and the back of the neck, but he managed to drive himself to the hospital despite having a bullet lodged in his head. He told staff members that he was involved in a shooting with law enforcement and was subsequently charged with attempted murder and various other crimes. Kelly was clinically dead when he arrived at the emergency room and spent 12 days fighting for his life in a medically induced coma. One of the gunshots had pierced his femoral artery, causing nearly fatal blood loss, but he miraculously pulled through and narrowly survived his injuries. Clary's defense attorney fought for leniency, arguing that their client suffered from mental issues which affected his decision-making abilities. The defendant's family testified that Clary's mental health and cognitive abilities were damaged by serious brain injuries from being assaulted at a younger age. They acknowledged that he had no business owning a gun and were upset that he was able to obtain one nearly 8 months after the shootout. A jury found Clary guilty of 2 attempted murder charges, along with 2 counts of felony assault on a law enforcement officer, felony disarming of a law enforcement officer, and felony escape. He was sentenced to 53.5 to 110 years in prison. Number 10. Jerry Lard. Police officer Jonathan Schmidt was running through the motions of a routine late-night traffic stop in Truman, Arkansas, in April of 2011, when the situation took an unexpectedly tragic turn. His dashcam was rolling as he asked a man in the passenger seat, 38-year-old Jerry Lard, for his name and birth date. He could then be seen walking over Lard's side of the car and opening the door, at which point Lard pulled a gun and shot him. Schmidt's partner, Sergeant Corey Overstreet, reached for his service weapon but took cover between 2 cars when Lard pointed the gun at him. In the dashcam video, Schmidt could be heard begging Lard not to shoot him again, but he continued pulling the trigger, shooting the officer in the chin, neck, wrist, and chest. Overstreet shot Lard as he tried walking over from the scene, then rushed over to assist Schmidt, who was struggling to breathe and bleeding profusely from his chin wound. Schmidt was wearing a bulletproof vest but died from the facial injury, while Lard survived his gunshot wound and was charged with capital murder, attempted capital murder, and methamphetamine possession. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, while the defense argued that Lard suffered from a mental disease or defect which affected his judgment and therefore made him ineligible to be executed. In July of 2012, a jury found him guilty as charged and recommended capital punishment. The judge honored the recommendation and sent Lard to death row, where he remains to this day after unsuccessfully appealing his case. Shortly after his first appeal was denied, Lard accepted his fate and asked the court for permission to withdraw the remainder of his appeals. The request was granted, and he is currently being housed at the Varna Supermax prison, along with the state's 25 other death row prisoners. Only 4 executions have been carried out in Arkansas since 2005, and they were all performed in 2017, shortly before the state's supply of lethal injection drugs expired. It has become increasingly difficult for death penalty states to obtain drugs for executions in recent years, leaving the future of Arkansas's condemned inmates unclear. Number 9. Ariel Castro. In June of 2008, a Cleveland police officer pulled over a motorcycle rider with a suspicious license plate in the parking lot of a gas station and immediately noticed that the driver, Ariel Castro, was acting overly nervous for a routine traffic stop. In dashcam footage of the interaction, the officer could be heard explaining why he pulled Castro over. And while it was further discovered that Castro didn't have a motorcycle license, it was a relatively trivial offense and therefore didn't explain his anxious behavior. Despite his unusual demeanor, the officer cut him a break and ticketed him instead of arresting him. 5 years later, in May of 2013, 3 young women who had vanished in the early 2000s and had long been presumed dead were rescued from Castro's home. Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus had been snatched off the street on separate occasions over a 2-year period when they were 21, 16, and 14 years old. They were routinely deprived of food and basic hygiene, assaulted, beaten, and abused in other unspeakable ways. To prevent his captives from escaping or being discovered, Castro kept them chained up inside locked rooms when he left the house, soundproofed the residence so nobody could hear anyone yelling for help, covered the windows, and installed heavy-duty doors and extra locks. On Christmas Day in 2006, Amanda Berry gave birth to a daughter inside the House of Horrors with no medical care. Castro occasionally took the child places but told people that she was his granddaughter or his girlfriend's child from a previous relationship. The women escaped with Berry's daughter after Castro forgot to lock a heavy outer door before leaving the house one day. They were still trapped inside, but Berry managed to yell loud enough to draw the attention of a neighbor, who forced the door open and called 911. The community and the victims' families were beyond shocked to learn that they were not only still alive, but that they were never far from home. Up until that point, Castro was a well-liked and seemingly ordinary member of the community who had never fallen under suspicion for the women's disappearances. When the officer who had pulled him over 5 years earlier learned of his horrific crimes, he experienced the chilling realization that Castro had acted nervous during the traffic stop because he was afraid that he would be arrested and that it would lead to the women being found. As night, Berry and DeJesus began healing from their trauma and rebuilding their lives. Castro languished in a jail cell, awaiting his fate. Most of his friends and relatives, including his adult son, cut all ties with him. 2 months after his arrest, he pleaded guilty to 937 charges and received multiple life sentences plus 1,000 years without the possibility of parole. He was found dead in his prison cell a month later, and his house was demolished about a month after his death, while the community looked on and celebrated its destruction. Number 8. Oliver Ashley Toledo Saldivar. Shortly before noon, one day in April 2022, New Mexico State Police Officer Corey Newman responded to a request for a welfare check of a man who was seen slumped over the steering wheel of a BMW along the side of an interstate in Santa Fe. The driver, 26-year-old Oliver Ashley Toledo Saldivar, obeyed Newman's instruction to exit the car before attempting to pull a gun from his jacket pocket. Newman pointed his service weapon at the suspect, who charged at him and tackled him to the ground. The officer shot Saldivar, who continued fighting and continued reaching for the gun concealed beneath his clothing. A passing semi-truck driver saw what was happening and rushed over to the scene, where he took Saldivar's gun away and helped Newman restrain the suspect, who died from his gunshot wound. During the traffic stop, Newman was unaware that Saldivar was wanted in Durham, North Carolina, for the recent shooting death of a 31-year-old woman. Following the incident, Newman was placed on administrative leave in accordance with the agency's policy regarding the use of deadly force. In a shocking twist, he lost his job less than a year later for allegedly assaulting a young victim. According to prosecutors, Newman was already under investigation for using his position of authority to stalk and harass women when he was fired following his arrest for the assault. He negotiated a plea deal that would have resulted in a 5 to 20-year probation sentence, but he backed out at the last minute because he didn't want a felony conviction on his rap sheet. Records show that he was nevertheless convicted of a felony charge and is now a registered predator. Number 7. Leo Princelow and Lloyd Motombeni. Armored car driver Leo Princelow is a self-defense, security, and counter-terrorism expert, a professional sniper and a former member of the South African Police Service's Elite Special Task Force. Thanks to these skills, the 52-year-old knew how to react when an organized gang of thieves opened fire on his work vehicle as he transported a truckload of expensive electronics through the country's capital, Pretoria. In 2021, the heavily armed shooters chased after the armored vehicle in several vehicles as they continued to shoot. Princelow, who would later be praised for remaining remarkably calm throughout the ordeal, instructed his partner, Lloyd Motombeni, who had been on the job for just 4 days, to grab his gun and respond accordingly to the onslaught of bullets. For the remainder of the chase, Princelow concentrated intently on reaching safety, while bullets pounded the vehicle and shattered a window just inches from his face. The truck's dashcam captured footage of the harrowing ordeal, which showed a pickup truck of 6 men pulling up alongside the armored vehicle and unloading their rifles onto it. They shot out a front tire, but Princelow remained focused on escaping the attack. He skillfully rammed into the thieves' truck and continued driving without missing a beat, even as he sideswiped another pickup truck full of armed robbers. The chase finally ended when Princelow rammed into an Audi occupied by some of the gang members in a parking lot. The car's occupants fled on foot as he exited his vehicle with an assault rifle, and the dash cam footage quickly went viral. Internet users around the world praised Princelow for his ability to stay calm under pressure and for his highly effective handling of the situation. But not everyone was impressed by his skills. After the footage began circulating online, he began receiving threatening messages from people who may have been involved in the botched heist. His employer provided him with round-the-clock security amid fears that the gang would try to exact revenge, and there was a disturbing increase in attacks on armored cars in the area in the weeks following the incident. Number 6. Ralph Stanley Elrod Jr. In November 2016, sheriff's deputies in Peach County, Georgia, responded to a call about a dispute between neighbors near the city of Byron. 57-year-old Ralph Stanley Elrod Jr. had threatened some young men with a gun because he was angry at them for riding their dirt bikes and four-wheelers in the street and on or near his lawn. In cell phone footage of the counter, Elrod could be heard threatening to kill the men, who politely responded by saying, "Yes, sir." When 41-year-old Sergeant Patrick Sondren and 39-year-old Deputy Darrell Smallwood attempted to arrest Elrod, he pulled a pistol from under his clothing and opened fire on them. He then retrieved an AR-15 assault rifle and a shotgun from his house and engaged in a shootout with the deputies. Dashcam footage showed Elrod falling to the ground from a gunshot to the stomach, but it failed to stop him from continuing to shoot at law enforcement. In the video, he could be seen crouching at the front end of a car and leaning on the hood with his elbows while aiming and firing the weapon. Sondren and Smallwood were killed in the exchange of gunfire, while Elrod survived the gunshot wound to his abdomen. 2 years after the incident, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of malice murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 3 counts of aggravated assault on a peace officer, and 2 counts of aggravated assault in order to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 100 years. In a shocking twist, Elrod's son Yaret is a sheriff's deputy in neighboring Jones County. Yaret had been working in law enforcement for about a year when the double murder occurred, and he was shocked by his father's actions. By all appearances, Elrod had lived a quiet, average middle-class existence as a married electrician, but a look into his past revealed that he had serious anger issues. According to the Mason Telegraph, Elrod's ex-wife had accused him of threatening and assaulting her on multiple occasions, and he harbored a long-standing grudge against her for calling the police on him despite avoiding any serious legal consequences. The dispute with his neighbors that led to the police being called on the day of the shooting had been going on for months, and while Elrod failed to explain why he killed the deputies, all signs point toward the likelihood that he had boiled over with rage and snapped. Number 5. Paris Wilder. Sheriff's deputies in Brevard County, Florida, were conducting an afternoon traffic stop near West Melbourne in August of 2021 when a man in the back passenger seat of the vehicle opened the car door and began shooting at them with an AR-style rifle, later identified as 38-year-old Paris Wilder. The suspect had been asked to step out of the vehicle just moments before he began pulling the trigger. He shot Deputy Brian Potters in the leg and struck him in the head multiple times with the butt of the rifle. Law enforcement shot back at Wilder and he was killed in the exchange of gunfire. Potters was treated at a nearby hospital for non-life-threatening injuries, and the other 2 deputies on the scene were unharmed. 2 other individuals who were in the same vehicle as Wilder ran from the scene in fear of their safety when the gunshots broke out, but they returned after the shooting was over and cooperated with law enforcement. They were cleared of any involvement in Wilder's decision to fire at the cops. Dashcam footage of the traffic stop showed Potters encouraging Wilder to exit the car to speak with his colleagues. he reassured Wilder in a friendly manner that he would keep an eye on a child who was in the vehicle. But the suspect opened fire on him without warning and in a completely unprovoked fashion. Wilder was a registered career offender with a lengthy history consisting of 40 prior arrests, including nearly 24 felony arrests for charges including robbery with a firearm, aggravated assault with a weapon, battery on a law enforcement officer, attempted first-degree murder, and other violent crimes. He was out on bond for 2 felony drug charges at the time of the shooting and also had 2 felony warrants out for his arrest. Sheriff Wayne Ivey made his feelings on the matter clear in a social media post containing the dashcam footage, stating that Wilder had gotten exactly what he deserved. In response to questions about why deputies fired so many shots at Wilder, Ivey responded by saying because evil can never be dead enough. Number 4. Hugo Yaret Cortez Ramirez. At 4:30 a.m. one morning in September 2019, police spotted a woman screaming for help from inside a Honda Accord that had recently been used in a kidnapping. The driver, 23-year-old Hugo Yaret Cortez Ramirez, refused to pull over and led the pursuing officers on a high-speed chase with the victim, his ex-girlfriend, inside the vehicle. The pursuit lasted for hours, reaching speeds of nearly 100 miles per hour before Cortez Ramirez ditched the vehicle along an interstate in the town of Zebulon and fled on foot. Dashcam footage from one of the police vehicles showed Cortez Ramirez running into the woods with a pistol in his hand while firing multiple gunshots at members of law enforcement. Another patrol car's dashcam captured video of a sergeant returning fire before the suspect vanished into the wilderness. The victim was rescued unharmed from the deserted vehicle, and Cortez Ramirez was found dead in the forest from a gunshot wound several hours later. In a 911 recording, a Durham County dispatcher could be heard telling a Wake County dispatcher that Cortez Ramirez had a history of kidnapping the victim. He also had a lengthy arrest record consisting of past charges for assault, breaking and entering, carrying a concealed weapon, drug possession, and more, and had been arrested at least 9 times in Wake County over a 6-year period leading up to the abduction. Local schools cancelled classes for the day due to the high volume of police activity in the area, and the sergeant who shot at Cortez Ramirez was placed on administrative duty in accordance with the department's policy regarding the use of lethal force. Number 3. Kristen Campbell. In May of 2017, Officer Patrick Coulter pulled over an unlicensed driver in Lincoln Park, Michigan. As he began to arrest the suspect, a passenger in the vehicle, Kristen Campbell, began arguing with him. In dash cam footage of the exchange, Coulter could be heard telling Campbell that he was sick of her mouthing off and ordering her to leave the scene before he arrested her for littering out the car window. Instead of heeding the opportunity to avoid going to jail, Campbell accused Coulter of stepping on her foot. Fed up with the woman's behavior, Coulter said, "You know what, forget it," and went to arrest her. Campbell sucker punched Coulter square in the face, leading to a scuffle as the officer fought to subdue the uncooperative suspect. Coulter tased Campbell 3 times until she finally stopped resisting and was taken into custody. Following her release from jail a few days later, Campbell told local station WDIV that she was sorry for her actions and that she had apologized twice to Coulter, who was left with a black eye. She further explained that she didn't know what came over her and that she punched the officer because he grabbed her from behind and she didn't know who it was. Campbell acknowledged that the situation could have had a much worse outcome if Coulter had deemed it necessary to use deadly force and said, "I guess I'm lucky to be alive." Today's topic was requested by Shannon Bourgeois 2071 and Guyan Commander. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Adam Nolin. In September 2018, 27-year-old mother of 2, Tia Mae Randall, was found shot to death inside her trailer at the Creekside Estates Mobile Home Park in Wyoming, Michigan. She had been killed by a single gunshot wound to the head, and investigators quickly identified her boyfriend, 33-year-old Adam Kenneth Nolin, as a suspect in the case. Authorities alerted the public to be on the lookout for Nolin, who was seen driving in his pickup truck later that day. he led police on a high-speed chase down US Route 131, which ended shortly after he lost control of his vehicle and crashed in downtown Grand Rapids. Nolin shot at law enforcement while attempting to flee on foot and was hit by a police SUV. Dashcam footage from inside the vehicle and cell phone video captured by an onlooker show the cruiser driving past multiple police vehicles that had surrounded the suspect's truck and striking Nolin from behind as he repeatedly fired the gun in the SUV's direction. Thankfully, no officers were injured in the shooting. The accused killer suffered serious injuries and was arraigned at his hospital bed on 5 felony charges, including assault with intent to murder and fleeing and eluding. He was later charged with open murder in connection with Randall's death. During Nolin's trial, the prosecution accused the defendant of killing Randall because he was angry at her for wanting to date a co-worker at the Mr. Burger restaurant where she worked. Shortly afterward, he called his mother and confessed to what he had done, and she contacted law enforcement. According to the state, the crime was premeditated, thereby warranting a first-degree murder conviction. Nolin's defense attorneys didn't deny that he killed Randall, but argued that he had snapped in the heat of the moment and that the crime wasn't planned. They urged the jury to find him guilty of a lesser second-degree murder charge. In June of 2019, Nolin was found guilty of first-degree murder, 2 counts of assault with intent to murder, fleeing and eluding, and weapon-related charges. He was sentenced to life without parole, along with 2 19 to 50-year terms for shooting at the police. Number 1. Theresa Heightman. Late one night in August of 2024, a Naples, Florida couple dialed 911 and complained that a woman had followed them home in a silver vehicle and was claiming to be the local mayor. During their conversation with the operator, the caller could be heard saying that he thought the woman was drunk, right before informing the dispatcher that she had just run over his mailbox. When the dispatcher asked the caller if the suspect was really the mayor, he replied that he didn't know who she was, period, or if she was the mayor. He asked the woman for her name, and the dispatcher overheard her identifying herself as Theresa Heightman, who is in fact the mayor of Naples. The 61-year-old was less boastful about her position of authority when police arrived at the scene, however, and could be heard telling them not to call her mayor in dashcam footage captured from a responding officer's patrol car. Heightman accused the couple who called 911 of cutting her off in traffic, but the police suspected that her behavior had more to do with the fact that she seemed intoxicated. She failed a field sobriety test, and her blood alcohol content was reportedly twice the legal limit, resulting in her arrest for driving under the influence with a blood alcohol level of 0.15 or higher. Heightman, who has been in office since 2020 and is currently in her second term, posted a $500 bond and was released shortly after her arrest, but stayed silent about the incident for a week before issuing a public apology. She reassured the public that she takes her duties as mayor very seriously and that she's committed to earning back the trust of the community that she serves. The public had mixed responses to Heightman's arrest, with some calling on her to resign while others showed forgiveness and support. Whether she wins back the support of the people she serves remains to be seen, and her criminal case also appears to be ongoing. Thanks for watching. What is the one thing that other drivers will do that pisses you off the most when you are in your own car? Let us know in the comment section below.